I'm 85 years old. My kids stopped visiting me 3 years ago. Not because I was a bad mother, not because we had a fight, because I pushed them away. Every single time they tried to get close. And it took me losing them to finally understand what I'd been doing wrong for 60 years. My name is Eleanor. I have 3 children. David, he's 58. Linda, she's 55. And Michael, my youngest, he's 52. And 3 years ago, they stopped coming around. Oh, they'd call on my birthday, send a card at Christmas. But the visits stopped. The Sunday dinners stopped. The dropping by just to say hello stopped. And I told myself it was them. They were too busy, too selfish, too caught up in their own lives to care about their mother. I was angry, hurt, resentful. And then one day my daughter Linda called me and she said something that changed everything. She said, "Mom, I love you, but I can't keep visiting you just to leave feeling worse about myself." And she hung up. I sat there for an hour staring at the phone, angry at first. How dare she, after everything I did for her? But then I started thinking, really thinking, and I realized she was right. Every time my kids visited, I made them feel terrible, and I didn't even know I was doing it. I spent 60 years pushing away the people I loved most, and I almost lost them forever, but I didn't, because I changed. And I'm going to tell you exactly what I did wrong and what I did to fix it. Because if you have kids, grandkids, people you love who don't come around anymore, this might be why, and it's not too late to change it. First thing I had to face, I criticized everything. Every single visit, I found something wrong. David would come over with his wife and kids, and within 5 minutes, I'd say something like, "David, you're letting those kids eat too much sugar. That's not how I raised you." Or, "Your wife looks tired. Is she taking care of herself?" Or, "Why are you still renting? You should own a house by now." I thought I was being helpful, thought I was showing I cared. But what I was really doing was telling him he wasn't good enough, that nothing he did was right. Linda would visit and tell me about her job, and I'd say, "Well, if you'd finished your degree like I told you, you'd have a better position by now." She'd tell me about a trip she was planning. I'd say, "That seems expensive. Are you sure that's wise?" She'd show me pictures of her kids. I'd say, "That one needs a haircut." Every single time. I couldn't just be happy for her, couldn't just listen. I had to fix, had to correct, had to point out what was wrong. And Michael, my youngest, he stopped telling me anything. He'd come over, we'd sit in silence, and he'd leave after 20 minutes. I thought he was being distant, thought he didn't care, but he did care. He just learned that anything he shared with me, I'd turn into a criticism, so he stopped sharing. After Linda's phone call, I started paying attention to what came out of my mouth, and I was horrified. I criticized everything, their jobs, their spouses, their kids, their houses, their choices. Nothing was ever good enough. So I stopped. Cold turkey. Next time David visited, he told me about his son's baseball game, and I wanted to say, "You're letting him play too many sports. He needs to focus on school." But I didn't. I said, "That sounds wonderful. I'm glad he's enjoying it." That's it. No criticism, no advice, just support. And you know what happened? He stayed longer, talked more, smiled. It took me 3 months to break the habit, 3 months of biting my tongue, of catching myself before the criticism came out. But it worked. Second thing I had to stop, guilt. I was a master at making my kids feel guilty. I haven't seen you in 3 weeks. I guess you're too busy for your mother. It's fine, I'll just sit here alone. Don't worry about me. I'm not getting any younger, you know, but you do what you need to do. I thought I was expressing my feelings, thought I was letting them know I miss them. But what I was really doing was manipulating them, making them feel bad for having their own lives. And it worked for a while. They'd visit out of guilt, out of obligation, not because they wanted to, but because they felt like they had to. And those visits were miserable for them and for me. They'd sit there checking their watches, waiting for an acceptable amount of time to pass so they could leave without feeling guilty. And I'd sit there resentful that they didn't want to be there. Nobody won. After Linda's call, I realized something. Guilt doesn't bring people closer. It pushes them away. If the only reason my kids were visiting was guilt, then I didn't really have them at all. So I stopped. Next time Linda called and said she couldn't make it for Sunday dinner, I wanted to say, "Fine, I'll eat alone again." But I didn't. I said, "That's okay, honey. We'll do it another time. Love you." And I meant it. I stopped keeping score. Stopped counting how many days it had been since they visited. Stopped making them feel bad for living their lives. And you know what happened? They started visiting more, not out of guilt, because they wanted to, because suddenly visiting me wasn't a chore. It wasn't something they had to do. It was something they chose to do, and that made all the difference. Third thing, and this one hurt to admit, I compared my kids to each other constantly. Why can't you be more like your brother? Your sister manages to visit every week. What's your excuse? David's doing so well in his career. When are you going to get serious about yours? I thought I was motivating them, thought I was encouraging them to do better. But what I was really doing was telling them they weren't enough, that they'd always be second best. Michael, my youngest, he got the worst of it. David was the successful one. Linda was the responsible one. And Michael, he was the disappointment. At least that's how I made him feel. He didn't go to college, became a carpenter instead, works with his hands, makes good money, has a happy family. But I couldn't see that. All I could see was that he wasn't like David. David has a degree. David has a career. Why are you wasting your potential? I said that to him when he was 30 years old, and he didn't speak to me for 6 months. When he finally came back, he was different, distant, guarded, and I blamed him. Thought he was being sensitive, thought he needed to toughen up. But he wasn't being sensitive. He was protecting himself from me. After Linda's call, I thought about all the times I'd compared them, pitted them against each other, made them compete for my approval, and I realized I damaged all 3 of them. David felt pressure to always be perfect. Linda felt invisible unless she was taking care of everyone. Michael felt like he'd never be good enough because of me. So I stopped comparing, started seeing each of them for who they were, not who I wanted them to be. I called Michael, and I said something I should have said 30 years ago. I'm proud of you. You're a good man, a good father, a good husband. And I'm sorry I ever made you feel like you weren't enough. He cried. I cried. And for the first time in years, we had a real conversation. Not me lecturing, not me criticizing. Just 2 people who loved each other, talking. That was 2 years ago. And he visits me every week now, not because he has to, because he wants to. 4th thing I had to face. I made every conversation about me. My kids would come over to tell me about their lives, and within 5 minutes, I'd turn it into a story about me. Linda would say, "Mom, I got a promotion at work." And I'd say, "That's nice, dear. You know, when I was working, I got 3 promotions in 5 years. Let me tell you about it." And I'd talk for 20 minutes about myself. David would say, "Dad and I are thinking about taking the kids to Disney." And I'd say, "Oh, I remember when we took you to Disney. You were 7 years old. Let me tell you what happened." Another 20 minutes about me they stopped sharing because they knew I wasn't really listening. I was just waiting for my turn to talk. Every ache, every pain, every doctor's appointment, every problem I had, I'd tell them about it in excruciating detail. But when they tried to tell me about their problems, I'd minimize them. You think you're tired? Try raising 3 kids with no help. You think your job is stressful? Let me tell you about stress. I made everything a competition, and I always had to win. After Linda's call, I started paying attention to how much I talked versus how much I listened. And it was about 90% me, 10% them. No wonder they didn't want to visit. So I changed it. Next time David came over, I asked him about his life. And when he answered, I listened, really listened. I didn't interrupt, didn't turn it into a story about me, didn't try to one-up him. I just listened. And you know what? He talked for an hour about his job, his kids, his worries, his hopes. Things he'd never told me before, because I'd never given him the space to tell me. I started asking questions, real questions. How are you feeling about that? What do you think you'll do? How can I support you? And I listened to the answers. It was hard at first. I wanted to jump in, wanted to share my opinion, wanted to make it about me. But I didn't. And my relationship with my kids transformed. They started calling me just to talk, not out of obligation, because they wanted to, because I'd finally become someone who listened. 5th thing, and this one was the hardest to change. I stopped being grateful, started being entitled. When my kids did visit, I didn't say thank you. I said, it's about time. When they called, I didn't say, I'm so glad to hear from you. I said, I was starting to think you forgot about me. When they brought me something, I didn't say, this is lovely. I said, you shouldn't have spent the money. I couldn't just receive, couldn't just be grateful. I had to make them feel bad, had to let them know it wasn't enough. And you know what that did? It made them not want to do anything for me. Why visit if I'm just going to complain they didn't come sooner? Why call if I'm just going to guilt them for not calling more often? Why bring a gift if I'm just going to criticize it? After Linda's call, I realized I'd been taking them for granted. These 3 people who loved me, who showed up despite how I treated them, and I never once just said thank you. So I started. Next time David visited, I said, thank you for coming. It means the world to me. That's it. No guilt, no criticism, just gratitude. And his whole face changed. When Linda called, I said, I'm so happy to hear your voice. Thank you for thinking of me. When Michael brought me flowers, I said, these are beautiful. Thank you so much. Simple, genuine, grateful. And you know what happened? They started doing more. Not because they had to, because it felt good. Because gratitude is magnetic. It draws people in. Guilt pushes people away. I'd spent 60 years pushing, and I almost lost them. But I stopped, and I started pulling them close with gratitude instead. And they came back. So what happened after I changed? My kids started visiting again, not out of obligation, Because they wanted to. David comes over every Sunday for dinner, brings his whole family. Linda calls me 3 times a week, just to chat. Michael stops by after work sometimes, just to say hello. And we laugh, we talk, we enjoy each other. For the first time in decades, I have a real relationship with my children. Not because they changed, because I did. I stopped criticizing, stopped guilting, stopped comparing, stopped talking only about myself, stopped being entitled, and I started listening, started supporting, started being grateful. It wasn't easy. I'm 85 years old. I've been doing things the same way for 60 years, but I changed because I had to, because the alternative was losing them forever, and I couldn't live with that. I'm 85 years old. My kids stopped visiting me 3 years ago, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it forced me to look at myself, to see what I'd been doing, to change. If your kids don't visit, if your grandkids don't call, if the people you love are pulling away, ask yourself why, not what's wrong with them. What's wrong with you? Are you criticizing, guilting, comparing, talking only about yourself, taking them for granted? Because if you are, they're not going to stick around, and you can be right. You can hold on to your pride. You can blame them, or you can change and get them back. I'm 85 years old. I changed, and now I have my children back, really have them. Not out of obligation, out of love. It's not too late for you either. Stop pushing them away. Start pulling them close before it's too late. Now, if you'll excuse me, my son is coming over for dinner, and I'm going to tell him how grateful I am that he's here.